Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I should say, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. Got a really special guest for you guys today. Obviously, we're looking at so many things that's going on in the world of football. The big thing is Tom Brady wins his seventh Super Bowl, upsetting the Kansas City Chiefs 31-9. A lot going on with our Philadelphia Eagles. I know that, the majority of you guys that tune in today will want to hear a lot of Eagles talk. But I give you a little bit. I give you, my opinion right here, and then I bring my guest in and we'll talk a little football, talk a little quarterback, talk a little Kansas City Chiefs, and the guy who is defying Father Time right now, Tom Brady. So there's a lot of chatter going on around Carson Wentz once again, and we still haven't heard anything from Carson Wentz and what his plans are. The latest news is that, any day now, the Eagles will be executing a trade, moving Carson Wentz either to the Indianapolis Colts or, I believe, to the Chicago Bears. And a lot of people are saying that there's a possibility that Nick Foles could be a part of that trade and wind up back in the city of brotherly love. The biggest question mark is what will be the draft compensation for the Eagles. You guys can, chime in down here at the bottom and let me know what it is that that you guys would like to see the Eagles get in return. When you look at the Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff trade, it seems like, the Lions procured a king's ransom in that trade from the LA Rams. What is it that the Eagles can look forward to in way of compensation for Carson Wentz? 28-year-old quarterback was on the verge of an All-Pro he's one-time All-Pro, but on the verge of an MVP season in 2017, the Eagles Super Bowl year before he tore his ACL and LCL. And in my opinion, just has not been the same since then. Had some glimpses of recovering and being who he once was. But last year, statistically, in every single way possible, he was the worst quarterback in the NFL. What does that mean from the standpoint of, what his value is on the trade market? And, there's a lot of talk that, hey, he should come back and be the guy to compete with Jalen Hurts for the starting job. It seems to me that that's not really what it is that he wants to do. And, he'd rather be in a situation where he can get away from the Philadelphia Eagles, get away from Howie Roseman, unfamiliar with a new coaching staff, and doesn't want to go through that process of rebuilding this football team. But at the end of the day, wherever he goes, competition is what the NFL is all about. And he's going to have to compete at some time, whether it's on the field or whether it's, with another quarterback for his position. He should be wide open to that possibility. Maybe the bridge has been burnt, the line has been crossed, and he feels like Philadelphia is not a place where, he can coexist and be the best that he can be. But at the end of the day, he's got 128 million reasons why he should want to stay in Philadelphia. If he really believes that he's the guy, then bring on the competition between he and Jalen Hurts and let the best man be the guy to win. For the Eagles, I felt like, the best thing to do is move on. His silence is deafening. When you don't say anything, you're saying a lot. Come out and say what it is that you want. You either want to be here, you want to compete, or you don't want to be here. But I think he owes it, to himself. He owes it to these fans of the Philadelphia Eagles to let everyone know where he stands, and he's been deathly silent since week 12 when he lost his starting job to Jalen Hurts. The other thing, if you keep him and then Jalen Hurts wins the quarterback competition, how does that fare for the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward? Because at the end of the day, they're going to take a major cap hit this year. I think we've all figured out what that looks like. It's 35 in dead space, 35 million in dead space if they decide to move on. If they decide to, bring him back, what does that look like next year? If he loses the quarterback competition and then you still have to move him at some point, either in season or off season next year, are you taking another cap hit rolling into next year. So maybe the best thing for Carson, the best thing for the Philadelphia Eagles, the best thing for this franchise is a fresh start for him, an opportunity for Jalen Hurts to, step into the starter's role, and then for the Eagles to, acquire some draft capital to fill the holes that obviously, that are there, and then go out and bring in a veteran guy to back him up and to mentor him as we move this process along. I have a feeling in the next day or two, we're going to find out the fate of one Carson James Wentz and whether he's going to continue to be a Philadelphia Eagle or whether he moves on to either the Indianapolis Colts or the Chicago Bears or another team for that matter. Okay. That's it for the Eagles for right now because I got a good friend of mine, Hall of Fame running back, Super Bowl champion. You guys would be thrilled to hear from him. Very, very insightful, knows the game backwards and forward. I played against him. And now we just tee it up and play a lot of golf together. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce my guest for today, one Marcus Allen. Marcus, how you doing, my brother?
I'm great, Seth, man. Good to be with you, my man.
All good. So give me your 2 cents on Carson Wentz because, there's been a lot of quarterback movement this year. And the funny thing is some of these guys are experiencing, Marcus, some of the things that you experienced in your time in the NFL with the Oakland Raiders. Carson wants out, it seems. There's reports that, that might be false. He feels slighted, like the organization did not support him, felt wronged by the fact that they signed him to an extension last year and then went and drafted Jalen Hurts with the 53rd pick overall that same year. And after the benching, seems like he wants out of Philadelphia. Your thoughts?
Well, it sounds like that, Seth. I obviously don't know. I'm sort of speculating, but when you sort of, and you did a good job of describing it, it seems like he's physically there, but not mentally there. And to me, once you depart mentally, you should go to another team, because that means not only your heart, your mind is not there as well. And you can't really fake emotions, you know what I mean? You can't pretend like you're really into something when you're not, right? If the situation isn't good there, it may be good for you and it may be good for the Eagles that you go someplace else. And obviously either Jalen Hurts or somebody else will try to compete for that position. But it's very difficult. I think anytime that one of the reasons, after I left the Raiders is I wanted to go to a place that wanted me, right? And, God rest his soul. He just passed away, Marty Schottenheimer. I want to give my condolences to his family. He called me every single day. Almost for a month, every single day, he wanted me to come to Kansas City. And that's really the feeling that you want as a player. If there's whispers about, I'm not so sure about him, and players hear that kind of thing, of course, I think they sort of, they mentally, they check out. And you don't want to be, a guy that mentally checks out and then decides to come back because you're not 100% there. You're really not.
Well, there's been so many mixed reports, and we live in the information age now where everything is right there on you between Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and everything else, TikTok, everything that's available to you. In my opinion, there's an opportunity for Carson Wentz to step up and say how he feels. The owner has come out and said, hey, we are hiring a new staff to come in and rebuild Carson, to resuscitate a guy that we have supreme confidence in. And Carson hasn't said a word. The GM said the same exact thing. I don't think the Eagles really want to trade him, but to your point, if he feels unwanted or he doesn't want to be there, then you have to remedy the situation, in my opinion, by moving on.
Well, certainly, if I was in that situation and the team expressed that they want me there, I would certainly, I would have that dialogue. I would either say yes or no. The fact that he hasn't said anything is sort of, makes you kind of, wonder what's really going on there. I mean, again, if I was in that situation, I would, and it expressed the fact they did want me to remain, I would have that dialogue with them, and I would sit down and talk to them. I would talk about the coach that they're hiring, and see if there's some synergy there, and try to make things work.
Marcus, the interesting thing about it, is you came into the league and I came into a league during a time where when a team drafted you, they basically held your rights. And as players, you had no power to
Yeah.
move. There was no free agency. It wasn't an opportunity to move. If a team said, "Hey, we're going to give you 200,000," you either took it or leave it. And they basically said, "You can sit home as long as you want. And when you're ready to come in, you can come in. You can take the prorated version, for the games or the training camp that you missed."
Right.
It seems that there is a major power shift when you consider the NFL and where it is in comparison to the NBA. You can remember that, Magic Johnson basically ran a coach out of LA
Right.
because he felt he wasn't the guy to take them there.
Mm-hmm.
You're beginning to see that with these quarterbacks now. They're making, $30 to $40 million, that owners are more leaning towards the side of quarterbacks and what the quarterbacks want than than the coaches. You see Carson Wentz asking to get out. You seen the trade, 2 weeks ago between the Detroit Lions and the LA Rams. They swapped Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford. And then, obviously the biggest one, and this has been going on for quite some time, even before the season was over, I believe, wants out of Houston. And these guys are wielding the type of power because of the money that they're making to demand these trades and demand these moves. They're getting them. Is this bad for the game of football?
Well, I'm all for players having leverage. You mentioned it earlier, Seth. I was one of the players. Well, you mentioned the fact that obviously when we were, drafted by a team, we were basically stuck with that team. And even if you retired and you decided to come back, they still had your rights, right? So I was one of the guys that sued the National Football League. It was 4 players. I think it was me, Reggie, Mark Collins, and I think Freeman McNeil, I think. We sued for free agency. So we wanted that power, right? But as you mentioned, the quarterbacks have more power than any other football player out in the field. And I'm all for guys being able to, to wield that power and utilize it to the best of their ability. It's a game that, physically, mentally, emotionally, it is a demanding game, right? And you can't play forever. So you try to put yourself in the best situation. I mean, I would suggest any player that has, talent, and that is obviously needed and wanted by their team to maximize that. But quarterbacks certainly have more, ability to sort of, I guess, make things happen more than the rest of the players. So I'm all for players because there was a time we had no power. I mean, we were at the subject, to the mercy of the team. And now things have changed. So obviously, you just want guys to make good decisions. Though you want them to do things in a way that that would make obviously their teammates proud, themselves proud, their families proud. Not to engage in situations where it gets ugly and it messes up the game of football and stuff. So just do it in a way. You have that power, but do it in a way that I think is respectful and is good for the game and good for your own image.
You're watching the Seth Joyner Show. My guest today, Hall of Fame running back Marcus Allen. And the thing about the quarterback, it's so much different, Marcus. A quarterback deemed to be the franchise quarterback, he never gets to the end of his contract. I believe that one of the biggest mistakes that the Philadelphia Eagles made is they had an option year for Carson Wentz, which picked up the option year with him coming off of, the knee injury and then the broken back injury in 2018, and then coming into 2019, There was a lot of questions whether he could stay healthy. He stayed healthy for the entire year, and then he got into the playoffs, and Jadeveon Clowney hit him in the back of the head in the first quarter, and he's out in the concussion protocol, and that was that. After that season, that's when they made the decision to extend him. And in my opinion, that was a mistake because with all the injuries that he had and all the questions going into 2020, you certainly could have exercised, the option year to find out exactly where he is. And then that would have saved them salary cap wise. They felt that they needed to do that with all the quarterbacks coming up and the rising salary scale for quarterbacks, that it was the proper time to do so. And he was the guy, and they moved on from Nick Foles, and they, made him the franchise guy. The problem at the quarterback position is unlike any other position because they never ever have to negotiate their deal. They're always re-up the year or two before their deal is up. And they're never, especially if you're a franchise quarterback, more times than not, you're drafted, in the top 10 to 15 players. So you come in and they just give you the job. You don't necessarily have to compete for it. And Carson's play is what put him in the situation in 2020, is what put him in the situation that he currently finds himself in. And now it seems to me that he doesn't want to compete. Now, as an 8th round draft pick, you're a 1st round pick. I get it. As an 8th round draft pick, I know nothing but competition because I wasn't supposed to make the team. So I had to come in and overcome all the obstacles. So it just rubs me the wrong type of way when I see a guy that says, I thought the team was mine. I thought I was the franchise guy. And then all of a sudden he's presented with an opportunity to compete, to exercise the meritocracy that the NFL, that the National Football League is. And he wants out because he'd rather be in a situation where it's handed to him on a platter rather than compete.
Well, listen here. Guys are different. You know that. We're not all alike. Even though I came into the league as a 1st round draft choice, I approached every single year like I was a free agent. That was for my own edification. That was for my own development. That's what I needed to be great. And so that was always a part of of what I think is important. That competition and the greatest thing is, regardless of who's out there, is competing against yourself. Because that's the guy you have to challenge every single day, honestly, you know what I mean? So every single day you got to cross a different threshold. It's got to be, the stakes have got to be higher. You have to motivate yourself in ways that most people don't even understand. And so when you see a guy doesn't want to compete and wants to be handed a job, frankly, those are the kind of guys that I prefer not to be playing with. I want guys that compete every single day, every single hour. That's the kind of guy. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm just saying, generally speaking, but that's the kind of guy I want to be in a huddle with, dude. And I played, and I'm sure you have too, guys that were less talented, right? But gave you everything they got. Mm-hmm. Those, I don't care. Those are the kind of guys I want to be in the huddle with. I want guys that compete, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of who they're against. If they're across from an All-Pro, if they're across from a 10-time Pro Bowler, it doesn't matter. They give you everything they got. I'll line up with those guys every single day.
And let me be clear. It's not that he doesn't compete, because I've watched the guy for the last 5 years play, and he competes. There's no doubt about it. But I'm talking about the type of competition that means your job is on the line,
right?
And where he is now. And to your point, it kind of speaks to leadership. And with him, that's been a big deal with the Philadelphia Eagles, because when you're drafted number 2 overall and you're deemed to be the golden child, the golden boy for your organization, it's expected that guys come in and they have leadership skills, that, just because they've been the quarterback, that they understand what it is, to be a leader. And I'm not insinuating that he is or that he isn't, but I just look at things for what they're worth. And I understand when guys begin to talk, when things begin to seep out of the locker room, out into the public sphere, it may not all be true, but I know that where there's a little bit of smoke, that there's a little bit of fire. Where there's a little bit of truth, there's some lies that tend to follow as well. And as I watched this football team, over the years, the intent was for Carson Wentz to be the guy. He gets hurt. Nick Foles takes over. He wins the last, so many games of the year. He's the Super Bowl MVP. He wins, a first Super Bowl for the city in the history of the modern era Super Bowl. And now the locker room is fractured because you got some guys that are Nick Foles guys, and you got some guys that are Carson Wentz guys. But when the Eagles make the decision to move to Carson Wentz and get Nick Foles out of the building, you still got to deal with the leadership part of it, okay? And that's what's been so troubling for me, is that I haven't seen this kid step into that leadership role. Because what do? Leaders take the bull by the horn. They realize that it's not about them. It's not about their play, especially the quarterback position. The quarterback has to be the guy that takes the blame for everybody. Because when things are good, he gets more credit than he deserves. Yeah. And when things are bad, he takes more of the heat. But you know what? He's the highest paid player, and he's supposed to be the smart guy. He's supposed to be the leader of the team. He's supposed to be the guy that stands in front of the media and says, hey, you know what? I messed up. I got to play better. That play was my fault. Even if the wide receiver or the running back drops the ball, he's got to assume that responsibility because the rest of the team will follow a guy like that, but a guy who pushes away from accountability and, doesn't outwardly make it seem like it was somebody else's fault, but in a play on words can make it seem like it's everybody else's fault but his own, is a guy that teammates will never follow, and that's problematic when I look at Carson Wentz and the type of player, the type of person that he is. Now, it's not speaking to his character, but I'm saying, if you're the leader, then you got to learn how to lead.
Well, Seth, I played with one of the greatest leaders of all time. I was fortunate enough to play with him at the end of his career. And we all know he had a Q rating that was way up here, right? It was off the charts. But he walked into the locker room like he was just one of the boys. And that was Joe Montana. And Joe did take responsibility. I remember him throwing a pass to Willie Davis to hit him right in the hands, perfect pass. And Joe said, that's my fault. Don't worry. We'll get it next time. Right in the hands. He said it was my fault. Joe never put a teammate down, never showed, was never demonstrative, didn't have any gestures that obviously sort of, made people look like, he was attacking someone or anything like that. Joe was just as good as you can get. And he galvanized guys like you said. I mean, that was a guy that you wanted to get behind. He never panicked. He never showed distress. I mean, he was always super cool, right? But I think, again, whether it was a rookie or whether it was a 16-year vet like myself or a 13-year vet at the time, Joe treated everybody the same, right? And so everybody loved him and wanted to play for him and stuff. So I understand what you mean about a quarterback that takes accountability and is able to motivate guys and treat everybody with great respect and have great expectations for everybody and himself. Not everybody can do that. I mean, certain people have a quality. That's why I call Joe the natural. He was just a natural at it.
Well, I think that is one area that, that the Philadelphia fan base and even some of the fans, some of the players have had issue with Carson. I want to move on because, the Golf Stafford trade, is done and over with. But the guy that, that intrigues me is Deshaun Watson. Again, you look at this year was statistically his best year, and the team went 4-12. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't get the kind of accolades and the type of credit that's really due what he was able to accomplish. They fired the head coach, during the season. his number one wide receiver, they gave him away, for a bag of tacos, and some salsa and chips, and you leave him with absolutely nothing. And then at the end of the year, the owner says, okay, we're going to involve you in the process of figuring out who the next head coach is going to be and who the new GM is going to be. A mistake or the right thing. Either way, that seems to be, the conversation that was had. And because that didn't take place, Deshaun Watson now wants, out of Houston. I'm starting to hear some rumblings about Russell Wilson also. Russell Wilson is kind of displeased about how things are going, in Seattle and, what they have and what they haven't done to put him in a better position to succeed because he hasn't had an offensive line and he's had to try to make it all happen with his legs. But these quarterbacks are being quite boisterous and quite outspoken about where they are and where the team is and what the team is actually giving them and not giving them to be able to succeed.
Well, Seth, you know this. We've players like ourselves have always been very opinionated. I would I would argue with the offensive coordinator all the time about what we should be running, right? I remember one time we were, number one in the league in rushing and number 26 in passing, and we're averaging 5 yards a carry in this particular game, and he wants to throw the ball. I'm going like, what are we doing? Let's just win the game. So, players, we see things too. I mean, we've been, I played this game since I was 10 years old, and so I understand it. I understand players. I understand, I understand overall personnel. I understand what works and what doesn't work. And so players have opinions, but players are players. And then we have coaches. But if they invite you to be a part of the process, and is it just, is it genuine or is it just something they're just, going to say to you and really not, take your opinion to heart? I mean, that's the big question. Did they really sort of, really wanted to hear what he had to say? Was it valuable to them, or is it just something they just, we'll give him, just a little lip service here and let him, let him think that, he's making a decision here. Obviously, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, all these guys, man, everybody wants to know who their coach is going to be, their new coach is going to be, because they want to know that, they have a similar philosophy, they have a similar style. They want to have an approach that's effective for them to try to get, to maximize their efforts and stuff. So, I mean, we're players, across the board. I mean, if you don't have an opinion, I mean, you're just a robot.
Well, I want to get to your opinion about the devaluation of the running back position in the NFL before we get to the Super Bowl and talk about, what transpired Sunday night. We're both old school. You being a running back, you want the ball, even now that you're retired, you don't want me to throw you the ball. You want me to hand the ball off to you. Running backs want the football.
Yes.
But we now live in an age of offensive football where third down defenses are the norm. It used to be back in the day, you line up in two back sets, split backs, I backs. So you line up, with, two tight ends and one back in the backfield, and you ran the ball. You had play action passes, off of these sets. And then once you got to third down, you brought the extra wide receiver in. You had three wide receivers. The teams who, were really advanced, they'd come in, with four wide receiver sets to really create some mismatches. But that's the NFL we now live in. And that's what, these new offensive gurus like, Sean McVay and Cliff Kingsbury. This is where the league is heading. And this is why you're seeing all of these young coaches that are brought in, because all of these teams are looking for the new, Sean McVay to do something, that to you and I is just elementary third down football that you're running on every down now. And it's devalued the running back position. But it seems to me when you really get down to games that really matter, and I argue with these data analytics people all the time, because their thing is, you throw the ball early, you get a lead. Once you get a lead, then you run the ball, and that balances up, your run pass ratio, and that allows you to get into 4 minutes, in the third quarter and run the game out. But my question to them always, okay, what if you throw it, the first 10 plays of the game and you're 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out? Okay, what do? Just throw it some more, making yourself one-dimensional? Whatever happened to let's run the ball and be balanced and be able to set up our passing game off the run game? Or if they've stacked the box, let's set the run game up off the pass game by going play action early, with a single high safety, and then coming back once you force them back into too high. Now let's run. We can run the ball at them. But they devalued that position, But every time I look up, you look at what Leonard Fournette did in the Super Bowl. You look at what I forget the kid, 27 from USC.
Yeah, Jones.
Jones.
Yeah.
You look at what they contributed on the offensive side of the football, and the run game's not dead, my brother. The run game is still a vital part in big-time games to an efficient offense being able to work in the most efficient of ways.
Yeah, well, the demise of the running back is greatly exaggerated, especially in playoff time. Whether it's bad weather or you got to be able to obviously run the ball, play action, keep great defenses off your quarterback and stuff. But what you talked about is it's had a great impact over all of football. You even have young kids in Pop Warner or high school that would normally play running back are now playing wide receiver because they're throwing the ball 40, 50 times a game as opposed to running. When I went to USC, I 35 to 40 times a game. That style of play is no longer, they don't do that any longer. So guys are saying, hey, why don't I switch positions? And so it has sort of transformed the league into a passing game. We look at, Hall of Fame statistics. You got quarterbacks that were in the 70s that threw it an average of 15 times a game. They were in the Hall, right? And then you have average quarterbacks that their numbers will be better, but because they're throwing it 50 times a game. You know what I mean? So we clearly understand that it's a passing game, but I think, Seth, this is important though, and I've often said this, right? Throwing the ball is great. It looks good. It's fancy. You can throw a pass to a defensive back, and he could be, have tremendous coverage, right? He may, turn his head the wrong way, right? And the receiver can still catch the ball, right? I mean, so you can make an excuse there, right? I didn't locate the ball, coach, or whatever it may be and stuff, right? So there's excuses that can be made in the passing game. But in the running game, that is the only part of the game that makes your opponent surrender. It is. Because the passing game is nothing more than a flag football game. Your defensive player never gets tired, right? But if you run the ball and you're physical and you start beating each other up, you know what I mean? Then you start wearing down, and that's the way we used to do it, whether it was, the beginning, at USC and, when I was with the Raiders early on, we used to run it, wear them down, and then we could do anything we wanted to do. That was our style of play. We didn't open up throwing it, 10 times, 15 times a game. And I needed, honestly, contact, whether I was running or blocking somebody. And if I didn't get that, I'd have been drifting all day long. So I needed some physicality, you know what I mean? So.
Well, I tell you this, I tell people all the time, from a defensive perspective, it is the most demoralizing thing, that you can ever do to a defense is to run the ball proficiently.
Yes.
And that defense not have a clue how to stop you.
Right.
I remember playing against, the Washington football team, and George Rogers was the running back. Man, dude ran for 270 yards on us that day.
260. There's few things as demoralizing as that, right? As a defensive player, come on.
And there was nothing that we could do. We knew that power O, that power trade, we knew it was coming just by how they lined up. Just saying, okay, we're going to run the ball right here. Okay, Seth, you got two tight ends lined up over you. They're both going to block down, and we're going to pull the backside guard and tackle. We're telling you what we're going to do. Now stop it. Whatever happened to that brand of football? And then when they had play action passes off of it. You got the safeties frozen, the linebackers frozen, because you got to respect the fact that it's coming. I mean, they're hitting you for 5-6 yards every single time they run it. And now they come with play action pass, and they can get whatever it is that they want in the passing game because you got man-to-man coverage on the outside.
Absolutely.
So I mean, when you think about that, I just don't get these coaches that are just so married to a pass-happy offense.
That's all they know, Seth. That's all young coaches know.
Well, I mean, listen, they've fallen in love with it,
that's all they know. I mean, I don't think a young coach knows how to put. I mean, even at the goal line, right? I mean, at short yardage goal line. I mean, I can't believe they don't even put fullbacks in the game. A lot of these, they're running from a short yardage from a spread offense. I don't get it. There's always one unblocked person. The fullback always gave me somebody to run off and stuff, but They don't even do that. I mean, it's really sort of interesting to watch that. I mean, I really noticed it on short yardage, goal line, and they have the same offense still in the game, and you only have you're really playing in the phone booth at that point, so it makes it very difficult. So you got to have to me you match up and put man on man, and then obviously everybody knows who's going to get the ball, but you got somebody blocking in front of you. But I think they're enamored with the pass. I think the more they throw it, I think the more I guess the better they look. More genius they look. I guess. You don't have to be so genius to run the ball. I guess.
Well, hey, listen, you still got to scheme. You still got to scheme the blocking, man. I just. I'm curious because you made a point about the players back in the 70s the quarterbacks only throwing it 15 times a game. I can remember the time, early in my career where the run game was still prevalent with guys like Montana and Elway and guys like Marino, who, in my opinion, is the best quarterback I've ever played against, from a passing standpoint. But all these great quarterbacks from that era, Marcus, these guys threw it, 25 times a game.
Yeah.
And they were throwing for 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. Okay. In comparison, so how do you compare, when you're talking about the great quarterbacks of those eras, in comparison and comparing those guys to the quarterback of the present era, when these guys are throwing it 40, 45, 50 times a game, and they're throwing it for 350 yards or 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. How do you make the comparison? Because if I took Dan Marino and I put him in today's NFL, man, he'd throw for 6,000 yards, man.
Yeah. I said that. I said Dan Mouse would do the same thing if the Chargers are playing today with all the weapons he had.
So when you're talking about the comparison of greatness, how do you compare today's players to yesterday's players?
It's difficult. It really is, and the game is. I even look at wide receivers and stuff. Back in the day, guys had to, you had to be really good because you were dealing with bump and run all the way down the field, right? And now the 5-yard release, and after that you can't touch anybody and stuff like that. So the game is clearly, has evolved to benefit offensive players. It really has. I mean, obviously it was, it wasn't necessarily 3 yards in a cloud of dust, but that was sort of the origin of the game. Run the ball first, and then we're going to play action, and we're going to destroy you. You're going to be tired, and you're going to be worn out at the end of the game. That was the philosophy then. Now it's like, hey, let's score, put as many points on the board as we can by throwing the ball. We're throwing an occasional run, to keep them honest and stuff. But, my mentality was there were certain guys at the line of scrimmage we knew we had to deal with, right? And dropping back the pass was a bad idea initially, right? So we needed to, we took it upon myself. I remember we were playing the Minnesota Vikings when I was with Kansas City, and John Randall was in the middle, right? And, John obviously had on his makeup and stuff. And and everything on his eyes and stuff. And I remember, Seth, they called a play, and I told the fullback, "Don't go out." I told the quarterback, "Don't go out. We're not going out. So don't look for it. If it's not there, if the wide receiver isn't there, throw it away." Because I told the fullback and I told the center, "You hold him up. You get one rib, and I'll get the other rib." Because we know we had to slow him down,
Right.
or he was going to be a monster the whole game.
Wow.
So and I would deal with the coaches later, but because I understood football, dude, you can't give a guy like that, fresh legs the entire game, because he'll destroy us. So what do we have to do? Well, we had to sometimes take it upon ourselves and deal with the coordinator later. And but to beat up a guy, to slow him down, and we did that a few times and really didn't hear from much the rest of the game.
Man, I tell you what, I believe that this new age methodology of offensive production, it ruins quarterbacks. It ruins a lot of quarterbacks. I think there's only a handful of quarterbacks in the NFL that can really survive with the 60 to 65% passing philosophy and the 40 to 35% run philosophy, because you just put them in such a bad situation, and it's even tougher for the offensive linemen. Offensive linemen would rather block going downhill than to be kick sliding all day long. And as far as the young quarterbacks are concerned, when you talk about Aaron Rodgers, he can throw it 40, 50 times a game and survive. Drew Brees can throw it 40, 50 times a game when he's healthy and survive. Tom Brady, if he's got protection, he can throw it 50, 40 times a game, and be successful. But some of these young players that are just coming into the game, they need a running game. You look at Jared Goff, they changed, the Rams changed their entire offense this year. And I don't know if people really even paid attention. They were a run-centric team. And then everything in the passing game, they had bootlegs and wide receivers, jet sweeps and screens and, bootlegs.
All that was the substitute for a running game that they wanted. Those little short things, right?
Yeah, but they were running downhill, Marcus. They came out and they established the running game early, which then allowed them, to mess with the defense's eyes with all this motion and all this reverse stuff and all this misdirection stuff. And that benefited Jared Goff, because I think they knew that he could not stand in the pocket and throw the ball 40, 45 times a game and survive, because the pressure was his kryptonite. And I think this move that they made to trade for Matthew Stafford was more with that in mind. I think they realized that they could not get over the hump with Jared Goff the way that they were constructed and with the type of offense that Sean McVay really wants to run. He really wants to throw the ball.
Yeah.
But he knows that he can't do it 40 or 50 times a game with a guy like Jared Goff.
The running game protects quarterbacks. Everybody wants to see the ball in the air, but we got to consider what's best for the quarterback's health too. What is the best way to protect him? It's not only in pass rush or keeping running backs in or keeping the tight end at times, but it's also running the ball, and that's necessary. And obviously, there's a lot of people that have gotten away from that.
Well, listen, I've seen a lot of changes in the NFL. I'm predicting right now that at some point in time, because the inefficiencies of quarterbacks to be able to develop to the elite level, that we're going to see teams move back, to a more balanced offense, especially early, to be able to set up, your ability to throw the ball based upon the running game. And at the end of the day, hey, if they want to stack the box, I always say, you can stack the box if you want to. Okay, you got a single high safety, you got an X and a Z out wide, just move them out wide. The good quarterbacks know how to manipulate the safeties with their eyes, and most teams play man-to-man coverage with outside technique, which I think is just sacrilegious, to defensive football, because you're just giving up the slant. So if I look this way and I draw the safety away, I can have whatever I want on the other side of the field.
Right.
So now what do I force you to do? I force you to drop that safety back, in the halves coverage, or make you play quarters coverage. Now I got a 6-man box. I can do what I can get done in the running game, what I want to get done. I don't see that strategy. I see teams line up with 8, 9 guys in the box, and they just hand it off and run it into a brick wall. Or I see them line up and just rush three, and they know they're only going to rush three, and they still try to drop back and throw the ball and force it into, an 8-man zone.
Well, think about today's game too, Seth. I mean, how many times did they put pads on during practice?
Don't get me started with that.
Like 11 times a year. Now
12.
think about this too, though. I've always thought it was a mistake for an offensive line's first step should always be forward. That's what they should learn, right? They should block first before they start pass blocking. Now a lot of guys' first steps are backwards, right? And so once you do that, it's hard to be physical. You really just laying on people instead of just burying people and stuff like that. But if you don't practice that, it makes it difficult. Obviously there's guys are making plays out there. They're making long runs and things like that. But the most of the time it is the physicality that is, I think, because this, man, it's physical and psychological warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Imposing your will on somebody, right? And again, throwing the ball all over the place is nothing more than a flag football game.
True.
You can never mentally destroy somebody doing that.
Well, I think that, with the new rules and the defensive, receivers and all that nonsense, I think that's where they're headed anyway. They'd rather have, a lighter version of the game. Let's segue and talk, the last, 15 minutes or so. I want to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Super Bowl 55. People ask me all week, who do you like? Who do you like? I said, no one stopped Kansas City, so my football mind tells me that there's no way that Tampa Bay wins this football game. But something inside me said Tampa Bay is going to find a way to win this football game. So they come out, and Patrick Mahomes, to me, is the best player in the NFL right now, bar none.
Mm-hmm.
And that defense made him look average. I mean, they got after him all day long. We talked about it, before the show started, what's going on in the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line. You're missing your 2 starting tackles, but they've had issues, off and on all season long. And, to your point, I talked about protection and how Andy never made the adjustment to go to 3-man routes and things of that nature. He never made the adjustment. He kind of reverted because for the last 2-3 years, he's been a guy that's been happy to run the ball with the 2 Williams kids, with Kareem Hunt before, his departure, with them drafting, the Hillar kid this year.
Yeah.
And then going and bringing Le'Veon Bell in. They've wanted to run the football to take some of the pressure off Patrick. But in this game, he reverted back to the Andy Reid of Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, he never wanted to run the ball. And all everyone ever cried about was run the ball, Andy, run the ball. You don't have the type of wide receivers that throw the ball as much as you want to throw it. And he reverted at the most inopportune time because his two starting tackles were out of the game. And this Tampa Bay defensive line with Jason Pierre-Paul and Shaq Barrett and Ndamukong Suh, they ate all day long. And those linebackers, Levante David and Devin Bush, man, they were just running all over the place making plays. Levante David impressed me because there hasn't been a linebacker that any team has been confident enough to put him on Travis Kelce and he'd be able to cover Travis Kelce. As a matter of fact, they always go nickel and dime so they can get the extra guy on him. But he covered him all game, and even though he had some big catches, those catches came via zone. In man-to-man situation, he was in his hip pocket eating his lunch all day.
Well, you mentioned it, and the game is always won in the trenches. And I could tell you, and people ask me, and I tell you, I was pulling for the Chiefs, but I had a feeling that Tampa would win this game because they were just had been on a roll. But I always can tell after the first 2 series, I'm not even looking at what happens, with the skilled players, right? I'm always looking at the line of scrimmage, the first couple of series, and I can tell you, I thought that Tampa would win the game from just the first two series. The first two times they had the ball, and the first two times Kansas City had the ball. Now, again, I get a lot of credit. Wide receivers get a lot of credit. The quarterback gets credit, but it doesn't matter, right? If you can't protect the quarterback, right? And not only was he getting pressure off the edge, he was getting it in his face, right? And that's what spooks quarterbacks. I've never seen him drop back. I mean, he never really planted the throw. He just kept retreating, you know what I mean? And so that means he was getting pressure up the middle as well, right? So listen here, we're only as good as the people up front. I'm gonna tell you, right? I was the MVP. I made a crazy run and stuff like that. But hey, the majority game, I had those guys, on that 17 Bob Trail, not that one, but other ones. They were, I was coming off that double team. We are blowing that guy off the ball. Those are the things that you look for, and then you play action with Cliff Branch. Then you play action with Todd Christensen. I mean, then you can do anything, but they could not run the ball. I mean, they made a couple of good runs, but they didn't dominate the line of scrimmage. And that was really, I think, the telltale sign of the game. Again, when you have obviously two tackles missing, but that wasn't an ordinary defensive front, as you alluded to. I mean, they brought it. I mean, that 58 was in the backfield the entire game.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he was, and I got to correct myself. I said Devin Bush. Devin Bush played for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Devin White. They're both outstanding linebackers. I always get them mixed up, but my listeners, I see in the comments over here, they're telling me, "Hey, it was Devin White."
Well, see, I wasn't going to correct you. I was just going to let it slide.
No, hey, listen, man, I make those mistakes too.
Hey, nobody's perfect, man.
There you go.
Hey,
there you go.
You're a 99%er, man. Come on, 1% ain't bad, dude.
Hey, listen, but I tell you, I just felt like that. Where was the plays? The guys, the people that I was watching the game with. I was in Pebble because I was playing golf that day. When I got done, we actually showered and had dinner together, and we watched the game with some friends. And they were like, "Hey, where's all the trick plays and all the things that Kansas City usually does?" And I said, quite frankly, they don't have Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the time to run any of that stuff. But listen, when you're trying to run the game, when you're trying to run the football rather, and you're not having success, and you've got a defense that's overly aggressive, I'm just going to throw it to you and let you answer the question. What's the number one play that you run to slow down overly aggressive defenses?
Well, I think quick screens to get to slow down the rush.
Thank you.
Balls. You got to do things like that. Traps here and there. I mean, there's quick hitters. The guys like that can run right past. The defensive tackles can run right past, and those linebackers, great linebackers. You got to give them credit. And they're super fast. But their whole game plan, I thought, was just to keep everything underneath, not to let them, he'll get past them, so they were playing so deep, they kept everything underneath, and they had linebackers that really, that covered the field, that eliminated a lot of the underneath things, I thought if you controlled number 87, you controlled number 10, you had a chance to win the game, and they did that. They made plays, but they didn't do anything like they normally do, which score touchdowns and stuff. So it was a game. I'm sure it was a very disappointing game for the Chiefs, especially coming off last year's win. I know they felt like they had an opportunity. I was pulling for them, but when you look at that game that day, the best team won. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were on a roll from the first playoff game until when they played the next one, and then the next, and then the Super Bowl game. They played well each and every game. There was no letdown. No, I mean, I was surprised actually, Seth, that I thought the Green Bay was going to win, and they blew out Green Bay. Green Bay didn't have a shot.
Well, listen, I'll tell you, as I looked at Tampa Bay's defense, the weakness, in my opinion, were the cornerbacks. And for some reason or another, those guys got through that 3-game window. Listen, they had to beat Breeze, Rodgers, and Mahomes, to become Super Bowl champions.
Right.
I
Well,
mean,
Seth, you know this, right? Those defensive ends can they can make cornerbacks look really good.
well, I do know that that's true, but I also believe too that it's a symbiotic relationship when you talk about a defensive front and a secondary, because when those guys are covering well, that gives the defensive line, especially those defensive ends, an extra second or two to get home.
Yep.
When those guys are getting there faster than they need to, then they have to cover a lot less, a lot less longer than they normally would have to. See, what happened in my opinion, with Kansas City is that where they hurt you is when Mahomes gets out of the pocket or he manipulates the pocket and those guys adjust their routes. Because what they do is if you're an underneath route, if you're a short to intermediate route, they turn around and they take it deep. If you're a deep guy, they bring it back along the sidelines. Well, they took that option away from him because that's really where he makes his hay. It's not so much all the time. If you're in zone coverage, they're running those deep crosses and they're playing with the eyes of the single high safety. They're gonna hurt you like that. But when they line up in 2 high safeties and all of a sudden, you don't have the luxury of those crossing routes, or you're in man coverage, and you know that when that quarterback leaves the pocket, that's the only time you can beat up on a receiver that he's now eligible for you to hit. Now, all of that improvisation that Patrick Mahomes had been doing all year long, it wasn't there for him. And you began to see him for the first time in his entire career, you seen him get ruffled and frazzled and uncomfortable. And then in my opinion, it kind of bled over on the defensive side of the ball when you saw the way that Tyrann Mathieu began to act. They came unglued because they'd never been in a situation like that before, and it all fell apart right in front of them on the biggest stage, that it could ever fall apart on.
Well, one of the things I noticed too, though, we got to give these guys credit for their physicality and their talent and stuff like that. But as I look at it, I mean, they look really smart. They knew what they were doing out there, Seth. And I was looking at one play, and I've seen this play against several defenses, and they, you can see the confusion back there, but not Tampa Bay. I think it was Tyreek Hill must have went in, zip zap, double whap motion or something like that, and they were still. I mean, they weren't confused. They weren't, they still had the numbers. The guys who they were assigned to on their side, they weren't at all confused by the motion or anything like that. And when the ball was thrown to Tyreek Hill, they were right there. I've seen teams just completely lose, their receiver, who the guy they were supposed to have based on the motion and stuff like that. But they were they had a great game plan. They really did. And then they executed it well. And again, you got these linebackers that were underneath that run as fast as some of the corners and safeties that they have. So, I mean, that was a great effort. That was really a great effort by the Buccaneers, and they certainly played well and deserved to win.
Marcus, not everyone has the personnel to be able to do what Tampa did to Kansas City. But I think a blueprint has now been laid. I think the biggest problem when you play Kansas City is your eye discipline. People just don't realize, that it's your keys that always take you to the ball. And when you confuse the keys, of a linebacker or a safety, then they're always out of position. That's what all of that crazy zigzag, lick-lag motion, that's what that's all about.
Absolutely. That's what I was referring to. As well, everybody runs maybe 10 plays, right? They put about 20 different faces on it, right? But Kansas City puts 30 different faces on plays. I mean, they got unbelievable motions and stuff, and which confuses most teams. I mean, I've seen a lot of guys just lose the player that they were supposed to be covering. Yeah, but they were disciplined back there, and they did not lose, one single player. I mean, I got dizzy watching Tyreek Hill go in motion. You know what I mean? It's like, and I'm sitting at home. So the fact that they stayed on point, they stayed with their personnel and who they were supposed to be covering. I mean, my hat's off to them. They did a great job. Yeah, I mean, if I was going to play them in the future, if I was another coordinator, I'd try to do the same thing. I certainly wouldn't have the same personnel, but I would try to do the same thing. I would stay deep, keep everything underneath, and hopefully, draft two linebackers that can run like deer,
So,
like you used to run, Seth.
hey man, listen, Devin White runs a 4.43, man. I ain't in my
I
dream.
saw him running his ex teammate down, Claire. On the side. I was like, whoa.
Hey, listen, man. I could only dream of being that fast, man. I mean, my top speed was 4.55, and that's that was many eons ago. But my goodness, man. I mean, when I watched those guys,
Seth, I actually heard that you were faster, but then I found out that you I guess was it in high school you tore two hamstrings and two Achilles, and then that slowed you down just a bit.
No, I ain't never been fast enough to pull or tear a hamstring.
I said the same thing. I said I wasn't fast enough to pull a hamstring, guys.
No, sir. No, sir. Okay, let's wrap up with Tom Brady, man, and what he's been able to do. Obviously, you played with the great Joe Montana. You played in probably the era, in my opinion, in the same era that I played in. I believe that was the greatest era of a group of quarterbacks, that the NFL has ever seen. Biasly, I say that. But when you look at what Tom Brady's been able to do and the controversy with him leaving, New England, and, the whole thought process is, was it Belichick or was it Tom Brady? And for Tom Brady at 42 or 43 years old to go to Tampa Bay with no OTAs, a limited training camp, and no preseason games, and a team that looked like all year long that they were teetering, that they couldn't figure it out. But for them to figure it out at the end of the year under all of this distress of COVID and everything else to wind up Super Bowl 55 champion, what does that speak and what does that say about Tom Brady, as a quarterback?
Well, I'm listening. You can't argue. I mean, the guy's gone to 10. I mean, that's unbelievable. 10 Super Bowls, right? And I mean, listen, I know Tom well. I love him. And he reminds me of Montana. He's another guy now with a Q rating, right? That's off the charts. I mean, everybody in the entire world knows who he is, but he walks in the locker room like he's one of the boys. And you can see how he's galvanized that team and how they play for him and support him. And you don't see him, obviously, if a pass is dropped, getting out of character or anything like that. I mean, his leadership, right? His leadership, I think, is like you said, Seth. I mean, he didn't have OTAs. He had to deal with COVID. All these things, right? And yet, they started to play and they played pretty well. And then they, I think it was a 4-game losing streak, right? Mm-hmm. And then held them together. And I know Tom said, listen here, guys, if we continue to do this, we'll be there. And they believed in one another. And I think he pulled that team together. Of course, we know, I mean, the way he throws the ball, the way he sees the field, the way he moves to the right, just a little bit to the left or right, just to sort of get a throwing lane. I mean, nobody does it better. But I think it's his leadership. He left one team, and with a new team, was able to galvanize that team so quickly and won a Super Bowl. That's what's remarkable about Tom. His leadership, again, like Montana, they treat the rookie well. They treat him well, just as well as the Pro Bowl or the NFL, all-time great player. They treat him the same, and young guys, they see that and then they want to play for you, man. And that's what's really sort of remarkable. 10 Super Bowls, man. I'm not envious. I'm not jealous. I just tip my hat. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I was lucky enough to get one, and it's like, I'm thankful for that. But it is remarkable. We talk about 10 Super Bowls. Is that so routine or what?
Hey, listen, man, and I've got listeners and viewers over here that's talking about the cheating, and I'm like, man, stop it. Okay, you I get it that a lot of people don't like the New England Patriots, and they probably don't like Tom Brady because who likes a guy that wins
All the
7 Super
time.
Bowls and goes to 10 Super Bowls? So I get it. Everyone's going to have their issue, okay? And people ask me all the time, how can you root for a guy like that? As a professional, ex-professional football player, I always root for greatness,
Yes.
and I'm able to look at greatness and see greatness and evaluate greatness and say to myself, we may never see that level of greatness in the NFL ever again,
Right.
you know? So I'm not going to get caught up in the he said, she said nonsense about cheating because listen, the whole reason why offensive coordinators cover their mouth while they're sending in plays is to keep other teams from stealing their plays because they've hired a lip reader on the other side to steal. Listen, they've been stealing signals. They've been doing all of that stuff. Back in our day, if you wasn't cheating, you wasn't trying, man. That was just the nature of the game. So if people can be
that was the NFL way. That was the Raider way. That's for sure.
there you go. There you go. Any little bit of thing that you could get to help you to be more successful, you take advantage of it. That was just a part of the game. So now people want to, hang this tag on them. Listen, you don't get the 10 Super Bowls and you don't win 7 of them without being great. And I'm able to just sit back, Marcus, and observe and appreciate the greatness of Tom Brady at 43 years old.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
And just revel in it. And that's it. I'm not caught up in all that other nonsense. I'm just in awe when I watch this guy play at the age that he's playing and he stands up on the podium on Super Bowl night. Oh, yeah, I'll be back. There's no doubt about it. Listen, they're ahead of schedule. They might win another one before he's done.
They're going to be the favorite next year. I tell you that.
Wow. Hey, listen, man, I appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Marcus Allen, Hall of Fame running back, Super Bowl champion. Marcus, I tell my guests every week, our most valuable commodity is our time. So, my friend, at the last minute, I appreciate you spending the last hour and 7 minutes with me talking football. You're always welcome back, man. I can't wait to catch up with you and Lauren. Kendra told me to give you a shout out. Tell her, she said hello.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. Hey,
let's
Seth,
get together.
I always take the time to tell my boys I love them, man. And so I love you. And thanks for having me, man. It's always great seeing you. Don't see you enough. But and I just want to tell the audience real quick that the reason we're friends, and this is the truth, because I respected you on the field. And the guys that I respected playing against, they played with conviction, never backed down, always gave it everything they got. I always had great respect for those players. And I think as a result, I think real recognizes real. If I was a fake and if you were a fake, there's probably the likelihood of us being friends were probably not very high. But because you were legitimate, dude, I just wanted to let your audience know that. And let me tell you what, and you talking about leadership, man, you were a leader on that team too. You led by example. So I just want to let you know that, pro. All right.
Well, brother, I appreciate it, man. As always. Be well. Hopefully we get together and can tee it up sometime soon. Once this crazy COVIDness, kind of eases up and once the weather begins to break. All right.
I hope so. Talk to you later. Brother. Thanks a lot, man.
Be well. You got it.
Too.
Hey, now, listen, I always tell you guys be good to each other and take care of each other, but most importantly, love each other. I'll see you guys right back here next week on the Seth Joyner Show. Peace and take care.